Ladies and gentlemen, how about a round of applause for my dear friend? I'm screwing around. He's awesome. Scott Budnick, everybody. Give Scott Budnick a round of applause.
Do I get a really long hug?
Yeah.
Thanks.
Heart to heart. It's got to be heart to heart. You can't. It's got to be heart to heart. Thank you. It's getting better. There's heart to heart, but I like squeezing kidney.
How's everyone doing? I'm going to be coming back here every time you have it. This is a really cool vibe. So thanks for inviting me. I came out here from Atlanta, 1999. Started working. My first job was on a film called Road Trip, and ended up doing Road Trip and then Old School, and then was promoted to run Todd Phillips' production company. So for the next decade, made every movie with Todd Phillips, ending in The Hangovers and Project X and Due Date. I guess after Old School, which was 2003, I kind of felt trapped in a little Hollywood bubble where, like, at night I was at some nice hip restaurant and then going to a club and kind of partying with some C-list celebrities and thinking I was cool, and didn't really realize that kind of right below the 10 freeway where we don't go, or kind of east of, well, I guess we go east of Gower now because it's cool. But like back then we didn't, and there were kids killing kids, and poverty was just wreaking a toll on those communities. And a friend of mine was teaching a creative writing class in Sylmar Juvenile Hall, which is in the Valley, and invited me down to be a guest speaker in his creative writing class called Inside Out Writer. So anyone that's a creative writer, you can volunteer and teach. And I went down and sat with a bunch of kids, 14, 15, 16 years old, who were in prison and facing life sentences. Sitting right next to me was a kid named David Negretti, who was one of the coolest kids you've ever met and had just been sentenced to 300 years in prison at 15 years old. And the crazy thing about our laws here is that if you're David Negretti and you're standing next to a friend that shoots somebody, the victim was in and out of the hospital in a day, shoots him in the butt. Standing next to the guy that does it gets you a life sentence and gets you 300 years. And David is currently serving a 300-year sentence. And sitting on the other side of me was Adam Avila, who didn't look a day over 11 and was scared and was trembling, and it was his first day in there. And you can imagine, I'll come back to both of them in a second, but you can imagine what an intense experience that was, seeing what was happening in our city that we were just completely aware to as we're eating our nice meals and partying in the clubs and spending money on bottle service. That couldn't sleep that night, and I started teaching that creative writing class every Saturday, and I still teach that class every Saturday. But just sitting and teaching a class wasn't enough, because I realized, like, the thing that got to me the most was the fact that as they went around the table and told their stories, every one of them had been fatherless. Every one of them had been either physically or sexually molested. Most had been a part of the foster care system. So every adult in their life that was supposed to be there for them either wasn't there or hurt them. And it's no surprise that they run to the streets, they find a bunch of people that pretend to love them, and they join a gang, and now here we are. So that sent me on a crazy journey through Sacramento and meeting the folks that ran the prison system. My kids were going to prison. So at first, a couple started getting out. And at first it was, okay, can I get on the boards of different nonprofits that can help them get a job, can help them get back into school? But then they went into prison. And so I worked with the head of the prison system, and we ended up creating college programs in prisons. So for our kids that went into prison and had to go into a place like that, rather than going into a very violent, dangerous place, we got them into a college program. Today we have 8,000 inmates in the California prison system that are full-time college students. Quickly before I continue, when I was in juvenile hall, I met a kid named James Anderson, who was rumored to be one of the most hardcore gangsters in the facility and always attacking people and always fighting people. And with that incredible introduction, I'll give you James Anderson.
Thank you for having me here, guys. It's a pleasure. Like you said, it's a different crowd, different vibe. And just like to follow up what was said earlier, sometimes when you think of a gang member, you think of these kids on the street. First thing that comes into your mind is what you see on the news. It's that kid with the tattoos on his face. It's someone that's addicted to drugs and is a killer and doesn't care about life. But oftentimes we fail to realize there's a story behind that individual. So as a young child, and I'll try to make this quick because I know we're showing out on time. I grew up in a dysfunctional family, so my reality of coming home in elementary was coming home to a father that abused me, a mother that abused me, and an older brother that abused me. So walking in through those doors, as good as a kid as I was, every time one of them had a bad or difficult day, they took out their anger and their emotions on me. And I started asking myself, what was I doing wrong? I was never good enough. And it started to continue until my parents finally divorced. And guess what? At the age of 13, now I find myself in a household with an older brother who's addicted to crystal meth and involved in gangs. So my reality of coming home to school and coming into that house wasn't coming home to a loving family and coming home to a dinner on the table, but coming home to a brother that would beat me half to death when he's on his psychotic rampages. I was coming home to a father that would lock himself in his room at 10 o'clock at night after coming home from work and asking me how my day was going. I didn't have family. We couldn't afford to get me into sports. So I started to drift in and out, and soon enough, at the age of 14, I was deeply addicted to crystal meth. And I was deeply involved in gangs. And I stopped caring about my life because nobody else did. And I got to the point where I tried to commit suicide. And I remember going into the kitchen cabinet and taking these pills, and I started to empty them out into my hand, handful after handful. And I remember as I started going in and out of consciousness, and I started throwing up and vomiting, and I knew I was in danger. As my dad came home, I thought, you know what, I don't want to die, I'm just a kid. And I ran to him and I said, Dad, just please take me to the hospital. And instead of doing that, he looked at me, and he looked at me with disgust, and he started to beat me. And he said, if you want to die so bad, now you're going to have to deal with it. And he locked himself in his room, and people are like, James, is that the moment that it clicked in your head, and you know God gave you a second chance because you lived? And I'm like, no, that's the moment I realized nobody else cares, so why should I? And I started going in and out of jail. And I was this bald-headed gang member, and I didn't care because I was so hurt. And by the time I was 17 years old, I was facing 35 to life. And people say, was that the time that you realized you wanted to change? And I'll say, no, that was the time that I had even less hope. Because the world had taught me to accept the fact that I was going to spend the rest of my life in prison, no matter which way. And then they would tell me, James, don't you want to go back home? And I said, go home to what? What are you sending me home to? This is the best it's going to get. And I remember becoming one of the most violent guys in the facility, so dedicated to my gang, to the point where everybody looked at me, all the staff and probation officers, and said, he's never going to change, so just give up on him. And the reason why I'm standing here before you today, because one person said you're wrong. This kid has the potential to do something amazing with his life, and I love him. And it took 18 months for me to realize this person was not trying to use me, because that's what I was used to for adults in my life. And at the 18th month, I realized, guess what? They love me. And that was mind-blowing to me, enough to realize that I wanted to change my life. Because that emotion I was feeling, I would give up anything in the world just to feel it one more time. And I gave my life up, and I decided, you know what, I'm going to put all this energy and passion, because I've always been a passionate person, into something better that's actually going to make something out of my life. And I was blessed. These kids that he's talking about that get these life sentences, it's all a coin toss. And I was lucky enough to stay in the juvenile setting. And I was given 7 years in a strike. And now I'm sent off, and I meet Scott. Well, I met Scott before that, but then Scott pops up again because he's everywhere. And I'm like, here he is again. So this guy's the real deal. He's not just in and out of our lives. And this is when he starts telling me about this amazing group he's putting together. And this is when he starts telling me about the potential of what we can achieve when we just believe in ourselves. And we became like brothers, and I came home 3 years ago. And it's been a non-stop journey, because guess what? I didn't come home to empty arms. Yes, I came home to a bad environment. I came home to a father that still hadn't changed. I came home to a brother who's still in prison. But I had a supportive group that cared about me. I had a brother that loved me. And since then, I realized that nothing else could stop me and nothing else can get in my way. I was able to move forward and speak across the country. I live on a plane now, and it's amazing because I never thought I'd leave the small circle of my neighborhood. I've gone on to be able to become the first full-time worker as ARC got launched, and helped create it and move it forward, and go into the prisons to speak to the kids that were once in my shoes. I've had the pleasure to, about 3 weeks ago, to go to the White House for the 4th time. And this time have them say, James, we have something for you, and pull me into a room and have some time alone with President Obama. And this is all because someone believed in me, right? And once again, just found out I was accepted into UCLA. So, so it doesn't stop and it continues. And I am a dedicated human rights activist who's going to UCLA, study international relations, to work in the Middle East and work in these countries that most people find quite dangerous. And that's where my heart is leading me. And I just read a book called The Alchemist. And I've been told to read it forever, and I never did. And if anybody hasn't read it, please do so. And I just realized the power that each one of us has to follow your personal legend. And it's so true, because when you decide to put your all into that, with all your heart and soul, the universe truly does conspire to make sure that everything happens the way it's supposed to. Thank you.
So now you see how quickly I learned when to shut up and let them speak. And that really has been the key to starting what we started. So we had a bunch of kids like James, incredible people, come home. And a lot of my former students now, we have one that's a cardiologist doing heart surgery, from gang member to prison to being a cardiologist. Others, one just built the Ace Hotel. He's the head engineer in the Ace Hotel downtown. And just incredible things are happening. And so the whole point of what we're doing, what the ARC, the recidivism meaning those who go back to prison. If we're anti-recidivism, we're not going back to prison. It's so funny, the smartest people in the world have not heard that word before. But a lot of what we're doing now is half of what ARC does is provide services to folks coming home from juvenile hall, from jail, and from prison. So whether it's housing, we just open up our own college dorm at a community college. So we have 24 people on probation and parole, young people living together and going to college together. So having that peer support structure around them is awesome. Jobs, mentoring, etc. The other half of what we do is use their stories to change the law. So I was in Sacramento earlier today, and in 2012 we passed a bill that we sponsored called Senate Bill 9, which ended charging youth with life without parole, so they'll die in prison. We're the only country other than Somalia that will send a kid into prison to die. And we don't do that in California anymore. It's against the law. The next year we passed Senate Bill 260, which gave 4,500 juveniles who got life sentences the chance at parole. And this year we're actually working on Senate Bill 261, which I was up in Sacramento today with a bunch of incredible stories like James. And I actually met with 21 Republicans. Don't say ugh. We need them. The thing about the Republicans in California, everyone thought that you could pass legislation to reform this system without talking to them, and you can't. Because the Democrats, there's about 20 Democrats up in the legislature that are such pussies, and they're so scared to not get reelected that they will never vote for stuff like this. But there's some Republicans who are brave that will. So in Senate Bill 260, which gave 4,500 young people the chance to come home to their parents, 9 Republicans voted for it, and those were the 9 votes we needed to pass it. And on SB 261 this year, it's going to affect 16,000 people in prison who never think they're coming home. And now if they transform their life, if they go to college in there, if they do all these things to show that they're ready and they're a different person they were when they were 18 years old, they get to come home. So David Negretti, the 300-year kid that I mentioned at first, because of SB 260, he goes to a parole hearing in 5 years. And he can come home within 5 years. And Adam Avila, the other kid, the little kid looked at 11 that was sitting next to me, was my prop assistant on The Hangover. Now he's in the union and he's kicking ass. So I think I wanted to, one more thing. We just kind of started advocating on the issue of solitary confinement, and I went up to Pelican Bay, and we met. Pelican Bay is in California, and we house people in solitary confinement where they never touch another human being, they never see the sky. They're in a concrete box 23 hours a day, and they go to another concrete box where they can go do their recreation and play handball by themselves. And we went up there to talk to those who qualified for SB 260, and the first man I met was 56 years old, and he committed his crime at 15. And he had been in solitary confinement in the SHU in Pelican Bay for 31 years, which meant he's never touched another human being for 31 years. And when I told him that he qualifies for SB 260 and he can immediately get a parole hearing to come home, this 56-year-old man started weeping. And when I was done, I went to give him a little, I was talking to him in a cage with little holes in it, because that's how you have to communicate with them. And I went to give him a little fist bump on the cage, and he stuck his pinky out, and he touched my hand, and he said, "You're the first person I've touched in 31 years." So how much hope can matter, how much showing them that there's people that care, like everybody in this room, that believes that they, like James, can find their better self. That's what this is all about. And it's the most incredible thing that's happened in my life. I've been out of the business for 2 years, but I've been convinced by a few people to raise $300 million and tell stories that actually help this issue and other issues that you care about. So in feature films, TV, documentaries, digital, to tell the right kind of stories, to move us in the right direction. The last thing I'll say, and I know we're getting short on time, is how do you guys get involved? My email address, and it's very simple to remember, and feel free to shoot me an email personally, is Scott, ARCLA, @gmail.com. So my name's Scott, ARCLA, @gmail.com. Feel free to go to our website and make a donation. If you'd like to be a mentor, just one-on-one mentor, if we have our members that are interested in the career you're in, just to show them the ropes, phone call a week, face-to-face once a month, that would be amazing. Anyone that has a job, a part-time job, a full-time job, will give somebody the chance. We now have 23 people in the movie union. So we started with one, they did a great job, and now there's 23 that are full-time in the union, making $125,000 a year, supporting their families, doing great. If you want to come with me to a juvenile hall or a prison and see what we're doing on the inside and visit the college programs or the creative writing class, or you're even thinking you could be a creative writing teacher once a week or a substitute once a month, feel free to shoot me an email. And what really matters here is I'm not even a writer, and I teach creative writing, but I come and I care, and I show up every week and I care. And that's all it's really about, because we're talking about a lot of people who didn't have a lot of adults in their life that cared. And that's the one thing that it takes to turn someone's life around. All it takes is one adult that shows them that they care. So that's huge. And if you're interested in the policy change piece, or coming up to Sacramento and helping lobby for any of these bills and any of this legislation, we will welcome you. So thank you guys very much. It's been amazing. Hope to see you soon.